Blackmoor Prison had been abandoned for nearly 2 decades, yet the building still stood like a dark monument at the edge of town. Rain poured steadily across the cracked pavement as Daniel Carter pushed open the rusted iron gate that groaned loudly in the silence of the night. Daniel had spent years documenting forgotten places, but this location had followed him like a rumor that refused to disappear. With him were Maya Lewis, a historian who had spent weeks researching the prison's past, and Ethan Brooks, their sound technician who carried a recorder slung across his shoulder. They had come for one reason: Cell 217. Stories about that single room had circulated for years among former guards and locals who refused to even speak its number after dark. As the three stepped inside the decaying entrance hall, the air felt heavier than outside, as if the building itself had been waiting. The long hallway stretched into darkness, broken lights hanging above them, and the echoes of their footsteps bounced unnaturally through the empty structure. None of them admitted it out loud, but from the moment they crossed the threshold of Blackmoor Prison, a strange feeling settled in their stomachs, the quiet, unmistakable sense that something inside the prison was aware of their arrival. Before they ever stepped foot in the prison, Maya had already uncovered disturbing records about Cell 217 buried deep inside old criminal archives. The cell first gained its reputation in 1978 when an inmate named Marcus Hale was moved there after violently attacking another prisoner. Guards believed isolation would calm him, but instead it seemed to break him completely. Within days, Marcus began shouting that someone else was inside the cell with him. At first the guards ignored his claims, assuming the man had simply lost his mind. But the behavior grew more unsettling with each passing night. Marcus refused to sleep and spent hours staring into one corner of the cell, whispering to something that no one else could see. Eventually he began carving strange symbols into the concrete walls using a piece of broken metal. When guards finally investigated his cell late one night, Marcus was found dead on the floor. The official report called it suicide, yet photographs from the scene showed bruises along his arms as if someone had held him down. No other person had entered the locked cell. After Marcus Hale's death, several other inmates were briefly placed in Cell 217 over the years, and every single one of them reported the exact same thing before refusing to stay another night. Someone else was inside the room with them. The deeper Daniel, Maya, and Ethan walked into Blackmoor Prison, the more silent the building became. Eventually they reached Cell Block C, the section where Cell 217 was located. The corridor stretched long and narrow, lined with dozens of rusted steel doors. Their flashlight beams cut through layers of dust as they slowly walked past faded numbers above each cell. The air inside this hallway felt different from the rest of the prison, thicker somehow, as if the space had been sealed away from time itself. Ethan adjusted his audio recorder and mentioned that the sound in the corridor behaved strangely, almost like the walls were trapping it. Daniel continued moving forward with his camera raised while Maya carefully examined the surfaces of the doors. When they finally reached the door labeled 217, all three of them stopped at the same moment. The metal door was covered in deep scratches that looked chaotic at first glance, but Maya quickly realized the marks weren't random. They were symbols, the same ones Marcus Hale had carved before his death decades earlier. Daniel pushed the door slowly, and the hinges let out a long metallic scream as the darkness of the cell revealed itself. The room beyond the doorway felt colder, quieter, and somehow more aware than the rest of the prison. Cell 217 was smaller than Daniel expected, but every inch of it carried signs of something deeply disturbing. The concrete walls were covered in carved symbols, far more than the records had ever mentioned. Some of the markings looked old and worn, but others appeared sharper, as if they had been carved much more recently. Daniel began filming the room while Maya documented the symbols with photographs, studying their patterns carefully. Ethan stood near the doorway holding his recorder, monitoring the audio levels. After a few moments, the device began picking up faint noises that didn't match anything happening in the room. At first Ethan thought it was interference, but when he listened closely, he realized the sound was actually whispering. The voices were extremely quiet and impossible to understand, yet they were clearly present in the recording. As Ethan slowly moved the device toward the center of the cell, the whispering grew louder. Daniel lowered his camera and looked around the room uneasily. Maya slowly turned toward the far corner of the cell where the shadows seemed thicker than the rest of the room. The whispers appeared to be coming from that exact spot, the same corner Marcus Hale had claimed someone was standing in before he died. While examining the carvings along the wall, Maya noticed something partially hidden behind the rusted metal bed frame attached to the concrete. With Daniel's help, they slowly pulled the heavy frame away from the wall, causing dust and debris to scatter across the floor. Behind it they discovered a message carved deeply into the concrete that none of the prison records had ever mentioned. The words were simple but deeply unsettling. "He is here." The letters looked fresh compared to the older symbols surrounding them. Ethan immediately felt a sudden drop in temperature inside the room as the recorder in his hand began to spike with distortion again. The whispering returned, louder than before, though the words still remained impossible to fully understand. Daniel stared at the message on the wall, trying to process what he was seeing. Maya leaned closer to examine the carving and realized something even more disturbing. The edges of the letters didn't look decades old. They looked recent. Almost new. Yet according to official records, no one had entered Blackmoor Prison in years. If that message hadn't been there before, it meant someone, or something, had added it long after the prison had been abandoned. Without warning, a loud metallic slam echoed through the hallway outside the cell. The heavy door of cell 217 suddenly shut with violent force. Ethan rushed toward it immediately and grabbed the handle, but the door refused to move. Daniel joined him and tried pulling it open, yet the rusted mechanism had somehow locked itself from the outside. Behind them, the whispering that had filled the room moments earlier began to change. The voices were no longer distant or unclear. They sounded closer now, as if they were moving through the room itself. Maya slowly turned toward the dark corner where the shadows gathered thickest. At first she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her, but then something shifted in the darkness. A tall shape seemed to separate from the corner wall and slowly stretch upward into the faint light of Daniel's camera. Ethan's recorder suddenly captured a clear voice, far louder than anything before. The voice sounded hollow and ancient, repeating the same quiet phrase again and again. Another one, another one. Daniel felt his hands trembling as he stared toward the corner of the cell. The shadow was no longer staying still. It was slowly moving closer. After several frantic minutes of struggling with the door, Ethan finally managed to pry the rusted latch loose using a piece of metal he found in the hallway. The door burst open with a violent crack, and the three investigators ran out of cell block C without stopping to look behind them. Their footsteps echoed wildly through the prison corridors as they rushed toward the entrance. Only when they reached the rain-soaked yard outside did they finally slow down. Daniel lowered his camera while Maya clutched the photograph she had taken from inside the cell. Ethan checked the audio recorder, expecting to hear nothing but static from the chaos inside the room. For a moment that's exactly what it seemed like. But near the end of the recording, a clear voice suddenly appeared. It didn't belong to Daniel, Maya, or Ethan. It was a fourth voice, calm, cold, and whispering directly into the microphone. The words were simple but unmistakable. Cell 217 is never empty. As they stood outside the prison staring at the massive dark building behind them, a faint scraping sound echoed from somewhere deep inside the structure, as if something within the walls had just carved another symbol into the concrete. And whatever still lived inside Blackmoor Prison now knew their names.